Talking about foreign and military policy for government students is incredibly important because what we do here in the United States impacts every other country worldwide. We can have direct impacts on other nations' economies, how we trade with them, the military policy, the interaction between two countries, the interaction between us and another country. So it's all encompassing. And for the sake of time, we're going to talk about foreign policy from about the 1900s onward. I encourage you to go back and look at the history of the United States foreign policy at our birth. But when we look early into the 1900s, we see just how worldwide a chaos was reigning. We were not a very stable globe at that time. And so as we worked into World War I, our first World War, it was supposed to be the war to end all wars. As we later see, that wasn't the case. But the importance of looking at what was going on will give us the direction that the United States wanted to go moving forward. The balance of power was off here. And when we say the balance of power, what we really mean is think about some nations are stronger than others. We know that. And some nations are going to align themselves with others. We know that too. So the balance of power referred to kind of this group over here with a certain amount of strength, this group over here with a certain amount of strength and weaknesses, and kind of were they balanced? Was the world in balance there? And when it's not, we needed what was called this collective security. Collective security is the idea of bringing a bunch of nations together to ensure that the boundary integrity, the sovereignty of these states, these nations, were upheld. Now, how best to do that? Enter in the United Nations. This was a largely peacekeeping endeavor to get all of the nations to the table, or most all, I should say, and then they would develop global policies that would affect all the other nations, and more importantly, their interactions with all the other nations. Now, what's interesting here is this kind of leads to this idea of the New World Order, or the one world government, led by kind of a totalitarian group that was going to implement global policy for all of the individual sovereign nations. And we don't want that. So the question often becomes, how purposeful is the United Nations? Do we still need it? This is up for incredible debate in Washington today, but largely the foreign policy aspect of the United Nations, we can still see many of those effects today. Now, the United States has a history of going against the United Nations when it better suits us, and being with the United Nations when it suits us. Other countries do that as well. But fortunately, because the United States is largely responsible for the maintenance of the United Nations, we get a lot in terms of what's going to happen. We get a lot of influence and say-so in what takes place. American foreign policy largely centers around this idea of spreading democracy across the globe. And there are good debates on, is that our role as the United States, but also containing communism. In fact, our policy of containment was designed to do just that. As communism spreads, and it's like oil and water, communism and our freedom and democracy don't mix. But as communism spreads, can that start to drown out freedom and democracy-loving countries? So it's constantly a battle. Ultimately, with the Soviet Union, this led to the policy of deterrence. So when everybody has nuclear weapons, we kind of view it as, hey, if you launch yours at me, I'll launch mine at you, and then we're going to guarantee our mutually assured destruction. Well, because we don't want that, we have designed programs to try and eliminate our need for these nuclear weapons. We actively tell other nations that are developing or that might be a little bit more hostile that you cannot have nuclear weapons, because we recognize the danger that a nuclear world would have on each individual country. It's at this point in a globalized society, the policy of one nation very much could affect the policy of all the nations. Today, America's largest foreign policy issue is that of terrorism. Terrorism is very difficult because think about even Osama bin Laden with the 9/11 September attacks. And when we went after Osama bin Laden, we weren't going after a specific country. So whereas World War I, World War II, the Korean War, those all had nations the United States was fighting against. See, now we don't have that. Terrorism is very difficult because it's very difficult to define the terms of who we're actually fighting. This is why terrorism and the war on terror are constantly in the news. Politicians battle it out over and over because it's very difficult to create a policy when you're fighting an idea, which is terrorism, trying to enact and achieve your political agenda through fear. It's very difficult to fight that idea because we can't point to a nation, point to even a leader, point to a military, and use that to combat what the negativity that's going on in the world. So I encourage you in your readings to really dive into the different aspects of American foreign policy, but understand too, where you come into this picture is getting to decide exactly how involved you think the United States should be in promoting these ideas of liberty, equality, fairness, individual responsibility, and freedom for all.